If you love history, don't forget to like and subscribe. Tonight, we journey back more than 2,000 years to a land torn by war, ruled by ambition, and destined to be changed forever by one man's vision. His name would echo through centuries. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. A man of iron resolve, haunted dreams, and stone-hearted grandeur. He would unify a fractured land with fire and steel. He would reshape the laws of life and death. He would build wonders to outlast time itself, and demand immortality from a world that offered none. But before he became an emperor, he was a boy, a hostage, a son of shadows. And so, our story begins in exile. The wind over Handan was cold, but not cruel. It carried the scent of millet and blood, winding through narrow alleys and crooked rooftops of a city caught between kingdoms. In one modest estate hidden deep within the city's northern quarter, a boy was born under uncertain stars. His name, Yingzheng. His mother, a concubine. His father, a prince, Zichu, a man exiled from the kingdom of Qin, now living under the watchful eyes of their rivals in Zhao. From the beginning, Yingzheng's life was a delicate lie. To the people of Zhao, he was merely the son of a minor noble. But behind guarded doors, he was heir to a throne hundreds of miles away. A throne coveted by many and threatened by even more. He did not play in the markets like other children. He memorized maps. He learned the names of every general in Zhao's army, every pass through the Taihang Mountains, every insult his kingdom had suffered in exile. His tutors were cold, his mother colder still, but it was not cruelty, it was survival. Never cry, she told him once. Crying is for people who believe someone will hear them. At night, he lay awake listening to the footsteps outside. His small bed pressed against the wall, the cold seeping into his spine like prophecy. Zhao spies were everywhere. His father was gone most days, making silent overtures to distant allies, bribing ministers, betting his future and his sons on the hope that one day Qin would call him back. Then one spring morning, the sky over Handan turned red, not with sunrise, with fire. A riot, a betrayal, a message sent by blade and blood. Zhao soldiers burst into their estate, swords drawn, screaming of treason. Yingzheng was just 10 years old. His mother dragged him through the back halls. A servant died shielding them. They fled through a hidden passage, crawling beneath stone foundations while the air above filled with smoke. When they emerged, it was not to safety, but to silence. Handan was no longer a haven, Zhao no longer a host. They were now prisoners in everything but name. But in the ashes of that night, a name returned. Lu Buwei, a wealthy Qin merchant, cunning, brilliant, and utterly without scruples. He had once helped Zichu rise. Now he returned with a promise. Freedom. Return. Power. Lu Buwei bribed and bullied a path back to Qin. And one bitter winter, the boy left Handan forever. Not as a prisoner, not as a prince, but as a weapon, shaped by fear, honed in exile, and pointed toward the future. As they crossed into Qin territory, Yingzheng did not look back. Never again, he whispered. No more hiding, no more running. From this moment on, the world would learn his name, and it would tremble. The walls of Xianyang stood tall and gray against the horizon, a city of angles and ambition, its towers casting long shadows over the Wei River. Yingzheng arrived with little fanfare, a boy prince, not yet crowned, walking through stone gates that knew the tread of armies and the whispers of conspirators. But those who saw him would remember one thing: he did not blink. The court of Qin was no safer than the alleys of Handan. It was a serpent's nest wrapped in silk, where nobles smiled with venom behind their teeth, and alliances shifted like desert sands. His father, Zichu, had reclaimed the title of king, thanks in no small part to Lu Buwei's maneuvering. But Zichu's reign was brittle. Within months, rumors of illness began to spread. Within a year, he was dead. Some say poison, others say stress. Only one thing was certain. At just 13 years old, Yingzheng became king of Qin. Not emperor, not yet, but already a ruler. A boy standing on the edge of destiny, with a kingdom beneath him and enemies all around. The regency fell, predictably, to Lu Buwei. He styled himself chancellor, protector, father figure. But Yingzheng watched. He learned, and he waited. He learned how war was declared, not with swords, but with scrolls. He learned how governors were bribed, how generals were broken, how loyalty was a mask worn for coin. He learned that to rule Qin, one must first break Qin. At night, he listened to court debates behind silk curtains. He asked questions that made old men squirm. He memorized laws, amended them silently in his mind. He trained in swordsmanship, archery, strategy, and the art of never revealing too much. By 16, he sat on the throne alone. Lu Buwei still held the seal, but the boy was no longer taking lessons. He was making decisions. Then came Lady Zhao, his mother, once silent, now whispering with a new lover, a eunuch named Lao Ai, a dangerous whisper. Yingzheng's blood boiled. He ordered an investigation. What they found was treason. Lao Ai had declared himself king consort, forged seals, and raised an army in secret. A coup in the making. The punishment was swift. Lao Ai was torn limb from limb in the marketplace. His family executed. Even the children, rumored to be Yingzheng's half-siblings, were cast aside like shadows. And Lu Buwei? Exiled. No execution. Not yet. But the message was clear. There is no room for rival fathers in the court of a king. Yingzheng now ruled alone. He was still a teenager, still learning. But his throne was no longer borrowed. It was carved beneath him, stone by stone, sealed with the blood of betrayal. He sent letters to the other states, not as equals, as warnings. The warring states had laughed at Qin for too long. Now the boy king was sharpening his blades. "We will unite this land," he told his generals. "Not through treaties, not through marriages, but through conquest." And the great unification began, with no coronation, no trumpet blast, just a young man stepping into war, with nothing left to lose. Steel rang across the valleys of China, not in celebration, but in slaughter. By the time Yingzheng reached his early 20s, the warring states were crumbling. 7 kingdoms, once proud and defiant, now faced the tightening grip of a single rising power, Qin. Each had mocked the boy king. Each would learn what he had become. He began with Han, the weakest and closest, like a blade testing its edge on soft bark before carving through bone. Han fell swiftly. Its capital stormed, its nobles shackled, its name erased. Qin's armies marched with unmatched precision, guided by the ruthless brilliance of generals like Wang Jian, Meng Wu, and Li Xin. Yingzheng did not fight from behind. He rode with his men. He watched from mountain passes. He held war councils in the mud of conquered towns, listening not for excuses, but for results. Then came Zhao, the land of his exile, the city of his fear, Handan. He returned not as a hostage, but as a conqueror. The siege lasted months. Walls collapsed, resistance withered. The people remembered his face. Many fled before he arrived, but he did not seek their approval. He sought closure. After Zhao fell, Yingzheng ordered a mass execution of prisoners. Hundreds of thousands by some accounts. Scholars debated the number, but those who walked the fields afterward found bones too numerous to count. Mercy, he once said, is a luxury for the defeated, and Qin did not lose. Next came Yan, a northern kingdom. Clever, dangerous. Yan knew what was coming and tried to stop it with a dagger. An assassin named Jing Qi was sent under the guise of diplomacy. A blade hidden in a scroll. A plan drawn in desperation. He entered the palace, bowed low, and struck. The blade cut through the sleeve of the emperor's robe. Blood followed. Yingzheng staggered back, screamed. Guards rushed in. The assassin was cut down, but not before the king tasted the breath of death itself. He survived. But something in him shifted. The man who emerged from that wound was not just a king. He was unyielding, unforgiving, unmortal. He crushed Yan, burned its cities, scattered its soldiers across the mountains like frightened deer. He hunted down Jing Qi's accomplices one by one and made their deaths a lesson. The lesson was simple. No one touches the dragon and lives. In the west, Wei fell next. Its generals broken, its rivers soaked, and now only two remained. Chu, vast and wild, and Qi, proud but paralyzed by fear. Chu would prove the fiercest. The war dragged on. Qin lost battles. Soldiers fell by the thousands. But the emperor, he endured. He recalled old General Wang Jian, long retired, and entrusted him with an army of 600,000. When asked what he needed, Wang Jian simply said, "A quiet heart and enough grain to last the storm." The storm came, and Wang Jian swallowed Chu whole. By the time Qin marched on Qi, there were no more heroes. No alliances, only silence. Qi surrendered without a fight. In the 26th year of his reign, Yingzheng stood atop a bloodied map no longer divided. The 7 kingdoms were gone, and in their place, one. Under one man. He looked out across the endless horizon, wind catching his cloak like wings, and he declared a new name. Qin Shi Huang, first sovereign emperor of China. There had been war without end. Now, there would be empire without question. It was neither a coronation nor a celebration. It was a proclamation, uttered not with joy, but with command. In the 37th year of Yingzheng's life, he renamed himself Qin Shi Huang, first emperor of Qin. Not a king, not a lord, but something higher, something eternal. He rejected the old title of Wang, used for generations by warlords and vassals. No, that name was too small now. Huangdi, he declared, a name drawn from the ancient myths, from gods and sages, from the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors who had ruled in the dawnlight of Chinese legend. He was not their heir. He was their successor. A new dynasty had begun, and with it, a new identity for the people. No longer Chu or Yan, Qi or Zhao. From this day forward, they were Qin. The emperor moved fast. With the ink of conquest still wet, he began reshaping everything. First, the nobles. He stripped them of land, titles, and independence. Gone were the feudal lords. Gone were the fragmented fiefdoms. In their place, a system of provinces ruled by imperial governors handpicked by the throne. Power no longer trickled from many. It now surged from one. Second, the language. Across China, dozens of scripts had flourished, fracturing communication like shattered mirrors. So he ordered the creation of a standard script, small seal script, so that all decrees, all records, all laws would be written in a single voice, the voice of the emperor. Third, currency. Each kingdom had its own coins, its own measures of weight and length. Qin Shi Huang swept them away. He introduced round copper coins with square holes, unifying trade and taxation. Rulers weighed in jin and liang. Grain was measured in standardized hu. The land began to speak the same language, not just in words, but in weight, value, and law. He commanded that all axles of carts be the same width, so they would travel smoothly across the same roads. He expanded the imperial highway system, carving roads across plains, over rivers, and through mountains, arteries feeding the body of empire. But it was not enough to change the systems. He had to change minds. Qin Shi Huang feared chaos. He feared philosophy, so he turned to legalism, a cold, brutal school of thought that favored obedience, order, and punishment. He outlawed competing ideas. Confucians were silenced. Books were burned. Hundreds of scholars were buried alive, their voices deemed dangerous to harmony. Only the law endures, he said, not sentiment, not tradition, not doubt. In the new empire, loyalty was measured in silence and submission. But in the shadows, resentment brewed. Families mourned, burned books, and vanished sages. Still, the emperor pressed forward. He was building not just a state, but a legacy. He built palaces vast enough to dwarf cities. He carved statues of dragons and phoenixes, hung banners bearing the black and white standard of Qin, and summoned artisans to craft images of his reign, towering, unblinking, unyielding. And then, he turned his gaze north. There, beyond the Yellow River, lay a threat unlike any warlord. The Xiongnu, steppe raiders, horsemen without cities, wind-carved men who could vanish across the grasslands faster than any army could chase. So the emperor commanded a wall not of a single stone, but of thousands of miles. A wall that would scar the land itself. A wall to separate order from chaos. But the wall, that would come later. For now, Qin Shi Huang stood at the height of power. The 7 kingdoms lay beneath his feet. The rivers bowed to a single will. And in his heart, a new thought took root. If I can unify the world, perhaps I can live forever. The empire was born in blood, but it survived in structure. Qin Shi Huang was not content with mere victory. He did not trust chaos. He did not trust memory. He only trusted the system, and the system would be his greatest weapon. Across the empire, imperial inspectors rode under banners of black and white. They visited every district, every province, every magistrate. They reported directly to the emperor, and only to the emperor. If a governor stole grain, the inspectors knew. If a general hesitated in battle, the inspectors knew. If a farmer lied about his harvest, the inspectors knew. Punishment was swift and often final. Heads rolled, families vanished, entire villages were relocated. But fear made things work. Under Qin law, punishment was not just correction. It was prevention. Steal a loaf of bread, lose a hand. Question a decree, lose your tongue. Forge a document, be buried up to your neck and trampled by horses. The laws were carved in stone and displayed in every market square, every city gate. There were no excuses. There was only order. Yet to many, Qin rule also brought clarity. Merit, once the realm of nobles, was open to the talented. A peasant who could read, who could count, who could fight, might rise, might serve. The road stretched farther. Canals were dug deeper. Bridges spanned the Yangtze and the Yellow River. Trade flowed. Armies moved like blood through the arteries of a living giant. And Qin Shi Huang, he watched it all from the halls of Yipeng Palace, his colossal stronghold, a monument to power, a palace with no known end, only expansion, only ambition. But control came at a price. Rebellions flared, whispers grew, and from within the court, betrayal returned. Lu Buwei, long exiled, had not disappeared quietly. Though stripped of title, he remained a man of influence and a threat. The emperor sent a gift, a goblet of poisoned wine. Lu Buwei accepted the gesture in silence and drank. Another ghost removed, another memory erased. Yet the past lingered in other forms. Among the people, Confucian scholars spoke of old values, of filial piety, of rulers who led with virtue, not fear. Their writings spread like roots beneath the stone foundations of Qin. So Qin Shi Huang declared war, not just on people, but on thought. He ordered the burning of the books. Except those on agriculture, medicine, or law, all texts were to be surrendered. Confucian classics, poetry, history, anything that suggested a world beyond his control. Scholars wept as fire consumed the words of their ancestors. Some tried to hide the scrolls. Others tried to speak out. He had them buried alive, hundreds entombed beneath the earth, their mouths still murmuring verses the empire would no longer tolerate. From the ashes of wisdom, a new silence emerged. He installed statues of himself across the provinces, mandated rituals, imperial festivals. Children chanted his name in schools. Courtiers knelt before his shadow. He became not just ruler, but myth. The people began to call him the Black Emperor, a title rooted in the cosmic belief of the 5 elements, where black symbolized water, fear, and transformation. Qin Shi Huang embraced it. He dressed in black robes, painted his court in black lacquer, a god of law in a world remade. And yet, behind the stone eyes of his statues, behind the obsidian curtains of his court, there was movement. He ordered architects, artisans, and soldiers to begin a new project. Not for the empire, not for the people, but for himself. Beneath a distant hill, a tomb began to rise, hidden from the world, guarded by silence, fed by dreams of death and the denial of it. The emperor had built a nation. Now he would try to build eternity. It began with a whisper, spoken in wind, in fear, in distant thunder on the northern plains. The Xiongnu were coming. Horsemen of the steppes, nomads without borders. They struck like lightning and vanished like ghosts. Villages burned, farms abandoned, frontier posts crushed beneath hoof and flame. Qin Shi Huang had conquered kingdoms, but he could not conquer the sky. So he decided to divide the heavens from the earth. He ordered the building of a wall, not the first, but the greatest. Across thousands of li, stones were laid by hand, earth tamped under sun and snow. Peasants, prisoners, and soldiers alike labored with bloodied palms and bound feet. Mountains were carved, cliffs were chained together. The dead were buried within the walls when they could work no more. No time for graves. The wall was their coffin and their monument. It snaked across peaks and valleys like a scar across the dragon's back. In some places, it rose like a fortress. In others, it was little more than packed earth. But together, it was the spine of the empire, a boundary not only of stone, but of identity. Behind this wall, Qin law ruled. Qin breath was drawn. Qin dreams lived. Beyond it, chaos. But while the world watched the northern heights, the emperor turned his gaze downward, to the heart of his greatest secret. Beneath a hill in Lishan, hidden behind sealed gates and guarded paths, workers toiled in silence, building a city beneath the earth. A mausoleum, the tomb of the first emperor. He had begun planning it the moment he took the throne. Now it had grown into a world. Crafted with mercury rivers and jeweled ceilings to mirror the stars above, crossbows rigged to fire at intruders, rooms filled with treasures plundered from every corner of the empire. And guarding it all, an army of clay. Each warrior was life-sized, each with a different face, different hands, different armor. Thousands of them, arranged in battle formation, infantry, archers, charioteers, frozen in eternal vigilance. They did not speak, but their silence sang. Here was a man who would rule in death as he had in life, not as ghost, not as memory, but as emperor still. The mausoleum consumed lives as quickly as it did stones. It was said that those who built it never left, to keep the secrets, to keep the shape, to keep the emperor safe for eternity. Above ground, temples rose to celebrate the emperor's victories. The palace of Epang expanded further, its corridors said to stretch for miles. So vast, the emperor could move through it for days and never walk the same hall twice. So vast, his voice echoed back as if spoken by another god. And yet, inside that palace, inside that power, Qin Shi Huang began to feel something unfamiliar. Not conquest, not control, but cracks. Cracks in the stone, cracks in the people, and cracks in himself. The wall was tall, but never high enough. The tomb was deep, but never deep enough. The statues were many, but never alive. He had built wonders, but wonders could not stop the truth. He was dying, and he could feel it. In the mirror, his eyes dulled. In the silence, his body ached. In his dreams, the dead spoke back. And so, a new obsession took root. Not glory, not legacy, but immortality. Power had brought him everything, except peace. And now, Qin Shi Huang found himself haunted by a truth that no law could erase, no general could defeat. He would die. The thought clung to him like cold mist, not in bursts of fear, but in slow, relentless drips. Every morning he scanned his skin for decay. Every night he whispered to the dark, "What use is empire if I cannot rule forever?" And so he turned to the only force he had never fully controlled: time. The emperor summoned alchemists, men in robes of vermilion and green, bearers of scrolls inked with arcane glyphs and whispers of the old world. They spoke of potions, of elixirs brewed from cinnabar, gold dust, and rare herbs that grew only beneath the roots of ancient pines. They promised life eternal. They promised God's secrets. He believed them. He had to. He drank their poisons. He swallowed mercury like wine. He tested every cure against the clock of his body. But with each dose, he grew more fragile. The irony burned in his blood. The man who had tamed a continent was now destroying himself, one sip at a time. Still, he refused to stop. He dispatched expeditions to the ends of the known world. Ships launched from eastern ports, commanded by explorers like Xu Fu, whose orders were both sacred and desperate. Find the Isle of Immortals, return with the elixir, or do not return at all. They sailed into mist and legend. Some say they never came back. Others say they found land and stayed, fearing the emperor more than the unknown. Meanwhile, within the palace, strange rituals unfolded. He ordered entire forests planted in strange formations, built observatories to read the stars, searching for omens. He replaced his closest advisors with mystics. He asked not for counsel, but for escape. Even his face began to change. He grew pale, hollow-eyed, hair thinned, hands trembled, but none dared speak of illness. To name death near the emperor was to invite it upon yourself. He traveled the empire more frequently, seeking sacred places, mountains, springs, caves where ancient spirits were said to dwell. Everywhere he went, the roads were cleared, towns silenced, prayers offered. But no answer came. At one such sacred mountain, an old hermit refused to kneel. He looked the emperor in the eye and said, "You can conquer men, but not the seasons. You can bind law, but not the wind. Even jade crumbles." The man was dragged away, but the words remained. The emperor began to fear not only death, but being forgotten. He increased work on the tomb. More soldiers, more artists. The Terracotta Army expanded by thousands, each figure carved to reflect a real man, each with soul, memory, and silent loyalty. If he could not live forever, perhaps his image could. He banned the use of his birth name in speech and writing. No one could say Yingzheng. He was not a man anymore. Only an emperor. Only the first. He began to speak of gods as rivals, of the sun as a jealous eye. He built altars, offered blood, and waited. But the stars gave no answers, and in his chamber, the candlelight flickered on parchment maps he could no longer read. His hands shook too violently. His voice cracked too easily. The emperor knew, finally, what all kings must learn. No wall could keep out the dark. But he still believed there might be time. One more expedition, one more temple, one more drop of silver poison to keep the silence away. He ordered a secret journey. No court, no fanfare. Just a caravan of loyal guards and doctors crossing into the east to find one final cure, to steal one final breath. It would be the last journey he ever made. The road was quiet, not with peace, but with the heaviness of something ending. Qin Shi Huang traveled eastward, cloaked in secrecy. The emperor of all under heaven reduced to a shrouded figure in a curtained carriage. Only a handful of trusted men accompanied him, physicians, guards, and one man who had never left his side, Li Si, his chancellor, a master of law, deception, and loyalty measured by survival. They passed through towns where children bowed, not knowing who rode past. They crossed bridges built by his own decrees. And still, the emperor searched for answers no priest, no potion, no promise could give. But his body betrayed him faster than fate. His breath grew shallow. He coughed blood by candlelight. His food turned bitter in his mouth. By the time they reached Pingyuan, he could no longer stand unaided. In the stillness of a moonless night, with wind rustling the silk canopy above him, the first emperor of China died. No thunder, no prophecy, just a rattling sigh, and then silence. But death was not the end, not for an emperor, and not for the empire. Li Si was faced with a terrible truth. If word of the emperor's death reached the capital too soon, chaos would erupt. The court would fracture. The succession would be contested. So he made a choice. He kept the death secret. They preserved the emperor's body with salt and ice as best they could. They continued the journey as if nothing had happened. But decay is not so easily denied. The carriage grew foul. To mask the smell, they loaded it with carts of rotting fish, claiming they were tribute to the eastern temples. The people bowed. The fish stank, and the emperor slept. Meanwhile, Li Si turned to another man, Zhao Gao, the imperial eunuch, trusted with palace rituals and secrets darker still. Together, they drafted a false decree in the emperor's name. It named Hu Hai, the youngest son of Qin Shi Huang, as heir. Not Fusu, the legitimate firstborn, loyal, principled, and stationed at the border with General Meng Tian. Fusu, they feared, would undo the harshest laws. He would soften the empire. And so, in the emperor's voice, they ordered his death. Fusu obeyed the decree. He opened his veins in quiet despair. Meng Tian too was eliminated. No bloodline, no protest, only silence. By the time the imperial caravan returned to Xianyang, the announcement was ready. The emperor had passed peacefully, and his noble son Hu Hai, now Qin Shi, the second emperor, would take the throne. But he was not a ruler. He was a puppet. A boy twisted by Zhao Gao's whisper, Li Si's strategy, and the crumbling shadow of a father he could never match. The empire, once forged in steel, now cracked beneath silk. Court factions clawed at one another. Governors grew restless. And far from the capital, the peasants stirred. Years of forced labor on the Great Wall, the palaces and the tombs had left the people bitter. Rain ruined harvests, taxes rose, and now the emperor, the real emperor, was gone. Rebellion bloomed like wildfire. First a spark in Zhejiang, then uprisings in Shandong, Henan, Jiangsu. Each peasant army shouted the same thing: "Down with Qin!" The name that once meant unity now meant suffering. Zhao Gao, now drunk on influence, turned paranoid. He executed Li Si, the man who had preserved his secret. Then in madness, he drove Qin Shi to suicide. The throne was passed like a cursed jewel, from hand to trembling hand. But no one could hold it. Not anymore. The dynasty that had united China unraveled in less than 3 years after Qin Shi Huang's death. Yet beneath the crumbling palaces, beneath the fallen banners, the emperor still lay, untouched, guarded by thousands of clay soldiers, wrapped in silence, and waiting. The face of power was gone, but the mask remained. For weeks, the empire moved under false light, its sun already extinguished. The emperor's death was a state secret, whispered only between trembling lips and silken sleeves. In the mountains and forests, commoners still bowed to statues of a man already dead. On battlefields, soldiers marched under a name that no longer breathed. In the palace, the ink still dried on decrees authored by a hand now rotting in a sealed casket. And the body, it traveled hidden, like contraband of the divine. Carts of salted fish smothered the stench. Curtains sealed out suspicion. Each mile was a deception wrapped in ritual, in loyalty, in fear. Qin Shi Huang, the man, was dead. But Qin Shi Huang, the image, still ruled. Li Si and Zhao Gao walked a tightrope suspended over the abyss of rebellion. If word spread, the world they had shaped would shatter. And yet, the charade could not last forever. The day came when the gates of Xianyang opened. The palace servants lined the steps. The black flags were raised, and the coffin, carved with dragons and iron knots, was carried into the Hall of Eternal Peace. There, at last, the death was announced. But it was no honest mourning. The people were told he passed in meditation, that he had reached divine harmony and chosen to ascend. No sickness, no fear, just a sovereign who rose into myth. Behind the words, the panic grew. Succession was staged. Hu Hai became emperor, and from that moment, the rot spread. Zhao Gao eliminated rivals with quiet ruthlessness. He created a ritual called the deer test. He once brought a deer to court and called it a horse. Those who agreed lived. Those who questioned vanished. He was no longer the voice behind the throne. He was the throne. And the throne was now made of dust. Meanwhile, the emperor's body was entombed beneath Mount Li. A procession of artisans, engineers, guards, and slaves descended into the final chambers. They brought jade ornaments. They brought rivers of mercury. They brought maps etched into stone and ceilings pierced with stars. They placed him inside an obsidian sarcophagus, his robes sewn with gold thread, his face veiled in silk. They sealed the tomb with stone gates that would never reopen. And then, they were sealed in with him. The Terracotta Army stood in silence, thousands strong, chiseled cheekbones, individual eyelashes, boot soles worn with sculpted realism. Each man had once stood on real earth. Each was now imprisoned forever in clay. Legends say rivers of mercury still flow beneath that hill, that crossbows, set with hair-trigger tension, guard the secrets of the tomb, that anyone who tries to enter will die before they glimpse the emperor's face. And so, Qin Shi Huang vanished beneath the ground, not buried, hidden. His empire disintegrated before his body even cooled. The Han rose soon after, and with it came new philosophies, new rulers, new maps, but none could erase what had been forged. Even in ruins, Qin was remembered, feared, envied. The name Qin would echo in every dynasty that followed. Even in the Western world, it would mutate. Qin, China. An emperor's title stretched across centuries, continents, and tongues. He could not live forever, but he had done something far rarer. He had redefined reality. Not as a man, but as a monument. Not as a ruler, but as a myth. The wind no longer carries his voice. No banners bear his face. But still, he remains. Buried beneath a mountain, guarded by thousands of silent soldiers, wrapped in shadows and sealed behind stone, Qin Shi Huang sleeps, but his dream never ended. Centuries passed. Dynasties rose and fell like tides. The Han, the Tang, the Song, the Ming, the Qing. Each one walked in his echo. Each one claimed to bring unity, justice, strength. Each one stood in the shadow of the first. For generations, his tomb remained untouched. Rumors spread of cursed soil, of quicksilver rivers that would poison any who dared disturb him. The mountain above became sacred and forbidden. And then, in 1904, a farmer digging a well struck clay. It was a hand, fingers frozen in formation. Beneath the earth lay what the world had forgotten, an army of stone. The terracotta warriors emerged one by one. Infantry, archers, generals, charioteers, eyes unblinking, faces unique. Some still bore paint, others bore cracks from the centuries, but all stood ready. And behind them, still untouched, lay the emperor's mausoleum. Scientists have scanned the earth. Mercury levels are abnormally high. Old texts warn of traps, of crossbows rigged to fire the moment air touches ancient halls. No one has dared open it. Not yet. What lies within may remain secret for another 1,000 years, but even sealed, his tomb speaks. It tells the story of a boy born in exile, a prince raised in fear, a king forged by war, an emperor obsessed with control, who could conquer every man but not his own mortality. He ruled not as a father figure, but as a force of nature. He was the river redirected, the mountain carved, the law made flesh. To some, he was a tyrant, a destroyer of wisdom, a butcher of scholars and souls. To others, he was a visionary, a man who saw chaos and dared to end it. His unification of China shaped the nation forever. The roads he built still form the backbone of modern infrastructure. The script he standardized became the seed of written Chinese. The very idea of China, a single state, vast and diverse, yet indivisible, began with him. And in that sense, he won. He did not become immortal in flesh, but in story, in legend, in stone. Walk among the warriors of Xi'an and you feel it. A gaze that has not blinked in 2,000 years. A silence louder than any war drum. A whisper from beneath the earth. Remember me. And we do. Not with praise or prayer, but with awe, with unease. With the quiet understanding that one man once held the world together by sheer will. And dared to believe it would last. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life and afterlife of Qin Shi Huang. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with fellow history lovers. New episodes every week, bringing the past to life. One breath, one stone, one story at a time. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and let the echoes of history guide your way.